This is Ocean Wings, where manner and magic leads to meaningful change. Hosted by me, ocean advocate Martina Wing, join us as we explore how nature can reconnect us to what really matters in life. Together, let's dive into how each of us can truly make a difference at this critical time for the environment and our world, and how we can transform awe and wonder into action, conservation, courage, healing, and purpose. Welcome to another episode of the Ocean Wings podcast, where we talk about the mentor experience and meaningful change that comes from it. And I'm so excited to have Makenna Trapani today. I tell you, this is going to be an awesome educational episode, how to really make change. So welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So Makenna, you live on the US mainland and you have a really interesting job today. So I want to if you could tell the audience a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah. So I graduated from my undergrad back in 2024, and I had a couple of changes in my degree, you may say. Started with pre-vet. I worked as a veterinary technician in emergency and critical care for about 5 years. And with that, I noticed a lot of systemic gaps between what you can do for the patients and the families of the communities and what actually comes out of it. So I noticed that as much as I was there for the patients and their families, I felt like I couldn't do enough. So I actually graduated with a major in sociology just to get a more broad stance of why people do what they do. And with that led me to an internship opportunity in Arizona, which led me to the legislature. So I interned on Senate staff. And from there, I learned all the intricacies of law and how the legislature works and the ins and outs. And it really, sparked a liking to policy and public policy, public service, things like that. So I took my experience with veterinary medicine and kind of transformed it into this new deal of protecting animals in a different way and being their voice and trying to stand up for them in ways that I wasn't able to do before.
I mean, my heart is going faster right now because in my work, and I'm doing this for so long with ocean creatures and living in this beautiful place, but seeing over and over again how our ocean recreation businesses do not do enough. And then I always struggle with that. And then I always know also that policies have to be in place to get to a better place, right? And you just laid out in a few words, you were sparked by this, you just looked at this, you got an internship here, and now you already make changes on the state level in Arizona, that's where you live, to protect animals. I mean, this is incredible. And you're so young. I mean, you figured out the system already, isn't it?
In a way, yes. It was a lot, and I was very spontaneous, and that's not usually how I am. So it all happened really fast, but I'm truly grateful for all the opportunities that were essentially laid out in front of me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what does it all bring? It's called Government Affairs Associate. That's what your job description is. What does it entail?
Essentially, if you're familiar with like lobbying, we have, whether they're attorneys or people who have their bachelor's degree, they work to write legislation with the members of the Senate and the House in Arizona. So whether they're a senator or representative, essentially the idea comes from a bill. Here's the idea, here's what we want to do. So you meet with legislative council and you draft this language to make sure it aligns with not only the current laws in the state, but also making sure that you're not butting into anything that's going to cause any confrontation with other people, which, politics is politics. There's always going to be confrontation. But as a government affairs associate, I work along a team of one being an attorney and another being, her right-hand man. And we work to get this idea across the finish line. So I, build stakeholders. We meet with the legislative members. We meet with really anyone who has an issue or wants to support. And we build this coalition to see how this language is going to really fit into the Arizona statute. And it's a process, it goes through committee votes in the Senate, and then it goes through a floor vote, and then it gets transferred to the other chamber and does the same thing. And as long as there's no amendments being made, then it gets to go to the governor's tower where the governor has the opportunity to sign the bill. So there's a lot of advocacy that goes into everything that we do. I've, worked with not only animal welfare policy, but also water and energy and human welfare as well. So just trying to get everyone together to get the same, idea, or bring all these ideas together to bring this into a statute that's going to fit for Arizona.
It's incredible. It's really democracy at work, and how all these wheels have to turn for an outcome, how a society lives and under what rules we live. And I was really struck. So just how did we meet? On the mentor experience. I mean, that's how it happened. I looked it up. Actually, we met twice in person, right? One was in August of 2023. And may I ask, how old were you back then in 2023?
Oh boy, math. I was 20.
And you were in college, and then you did your degree in sociology, right? That was your first emphasis. And at that point, you already had worked with animals at a vet, right? And you saw how the animals could be so much better treated, including their families. That's what you saw. Broke your heart, and you're just like, what can I do to get to a place where the animals are in the forefront? Because our podcast is really about animals. At the same time, how people's heart are being touched by the manner and magic, being just in their presence. So we meet at when you're 20 years old. A few months later, you definitely sent your dad right after. He's like, Dad, you have to do this too. Is that true?
Yes. With my undergrad, I also had another spontaneous idea to get involved in shark research. So I worked with ASU Shark Lab, and with the doctorate students that were working to get their PhD, I helped them compile their research of the different levels of hormones in the sharks that they were able to collect data from. So we, spun down the hormones of progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen, and just to see what are the levels in their body that needs to be at? Why is the shark here? Is it foraging? Is it breeding? Is it just, doing its normal migration through the ocean? And so I've always had this passion for, ocean conservation and being the voice for those who don't have one. So when I was introduced to man ray advocates, and scuba diving with sharks is one thing, and they do their own thing, and they're all over the place. But having that manta ray look you in your soul and have them, do that flip up you, it's just such an amazing feeling of, they feel like angels. They're just these angels of the ocean that are right there with you, and it's such a beautiful experience. So it was interesting to see the experiences of the research aspect and trying to, conserve and work for the environment in one way. And then having your experience where you're like, this is my job. This is what I do every day. I'm with them and wanting to advocate for them and try to essentially just inform the people of the community and outside of it to get the job done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's this saying from Jacques Cousteau, only when you fall in love with something, you will protect it, right? So in my work, what I see over and over, that people are really touched when they leave the manor experience. And then that's what this podcast is now about. Let's explore how we can make meaningful change. That excites me so much about you being so young, to have already a path where it is, while democracy works to create, it's the government we put in place, put the right people in place so we can protect the animals, right? I'm really always set back that in Hawaii, we haven't been able to regulate the manta ray industry. There's so many boats now, there's so many people in the water. And it took me, unfortunately, until I was quite old to understand policies have to be in place. But even then, I don't really understand the whole legislator. I was not an informed citizen to understand how all these wheels work. And that excites me so much. You're at a young age. You can set the tone where you want to be with the society you want to live in. You'll live so much longer on this planet, and create a planet or a sustainable living for us humans on how we engage with everything. And that is so exciting to me. So I'm really pleased to hear all of the things you do. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, it's definitely interesting how I went from, I work 3 12s throughout the week, and whether it was, performing CPR on a dog or a cat, or showing an owner how to give sub-Q fluids in a form of treatment, to now being in the capital of Arizona on the other side of things, running policy and, building those stakeholders and coalitions. It was a really quick change, I think, but the second I started it, that internship in my undergrad, I finally felt like I was on the right path of doing what I needed to do. And that's just such a great feeling. So just taking all that I've learned and just being able, whether it is because I'm younger, but having this time to truly focus on what I want to do.
Yeah, you just said something, it's like it's a good feeling. You had a feeling that this is the right path. And that's what meaningful living, doing the things that are meaningful actually generates in yourself. It's a feeling. It's a feeling like the time I have on this planet, I walk into the right direction. Life is a long journey. For me, it was when I was 30 and I saw the man race for the first time. And then being a tourist from Germany, it definitely was a change of the whole trajectory of my life. Being here now in Hawaii for so long and doing the work, but it was always meaningful to me to stay on that path to help the voiceless. In this case, it's man race, but in your case, it was like you are every day as an assistant, a vet assistant, or how do you call it? Vet tech? A vet
That is
tech?
the song, that tech, potato, potato. Yeah.
It's like to be in a place where you wanted to help the animals and the families. But I actually appreciate you also saying the animals first and also the humans. But while we make all the policies, how we live, the animals will never have a chance to make policy. We have to be the voices for them.
Right. And a lot of things have changed over the years in terms of, you know, just how people look at animals in general. And there's still a difference between whether it's small animal or large animal. For example, the law that we enacted last year is specifically towards domesticated animals, but it was whether you are purposely, intentionally, or recklessly neglecting an animal's medical care. Because there was actually a case back in 2023 where there was an individual who was hoarding 50 plus animals in her home, all of which had special needs. And because of the current statute in place, there couldn't be a placement of a warrant to get those animals out in time. So by the time that the animal welfare institutes and policemen or policemen and women were able to get into the house, there was a lot of deceased animals. So a lot of that stemmed from previous situations, but that was the huge marker in Arizona of we need to make a change. We need to inform, our constituents and the individuals that live in Arizona and educate them on what they need to do for their pet if they take the responsibility to own one, but also imply, exemptions towards those who may not have the financial ability to take care of a pet in a certain way or those who are unhoused. Like we need to make sure that we're not just signaling towards one type of group of people and making sure that it fits for all of Arizona. All in all, it just comes down to educating them and providing resources.
An educated citizen. What a great concept, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I love all of it, everything you're saying today. Because I'm so stuck in my little world trying to be the voice for the voiceless. But I'm making like some little progress too. I have some work that I do here locally with it's Indivisible to look at policies and push the legislator. I'm now in that team to write testimony to about all the things we care about as a group. I understand the wheels a little better now, but you're in the Capitol every day, you said, right? You're just walking the halls there and you're just connecting the dots to make the difference that needs to be done. Fantastic. Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit more about the wheels of democracy, how this all works. Let's say go back to the animal rights legislation you pushed through from start to finish. How long did it take?
So it was something that constituents were working on for quite a while. So this bill was on behalf of a animal welfare institute in Arizona that's huge in animal welfare processes and ensuring that there is a voice for the animals. And so it was actually started in, I believe, in 2023, especially after that cruelty case that happened, and it took 2 years to pass. So one year, the team did everything they could to build the stakeholders and make sure everyone was on the same page. And we received a lot of pushback in terms of varying groups, making sure that, the law's not going to go too far. We don't want it to be too strict or lack exemptions for those who, again, don't have the financial means or lack access to a home. And so once we got all of that completed in that first year, we barely missed passing the legislation by just a couple of hours, actually.
What does that mean? You missed it by 2 hours. I mean, I'm just trying to logistically. There is the House that votes on something, or there's a committee that votes on something, or there is a Senate voting on something until it gets to the governor. But what does that mean 2 hours late?
So there's certain time frames. So you have essentially 3 to 4 weeks to hear a bill in the original chamber. So you can introduce either a House bill or a Senate bill. and then they flip. So you have a week in the end of February called crossover week. So this is when your bill from the House gets transferred over to the Senate, and it starts with the same process. And so now you're with a different ballpark of leadership where, okay, everyone on this side agreed. Now we have to lobby on the other side, and you have different personalities and opinions all working together. So one side may have been easier than the other, or the other way around. But essentially, that 3 week starts all over once it hits the new chamber. And you have to get the conformity from the leadership to hear that bill in the committee. And then it goes through the floor again if there's any amendments. But then there's a final vote that instead of being transmitted to the other chamber, it's transmitted to the governor. So there's a small window once you reach the end of session in terms of once you hear all the bills and you need to start working on the state budget, where you have this very small window where only a certain amount of bills can go on the agenda to be transmitted to the governor. So that was that window where it was missed, where it's like we wanted to reach all the opinions of the members of one chamber, but there's so much pushback in a certain way that sometimes they won't hear the bill. And so it leaves you just a little bit of time to like really push it. And even as much as you push and push, it just might not turn out the way you want it to. So that's what led us into doing it all over again the next year.
And that's a good message. Just be persistent. You
Mhm.
really wanted to bring this through the legislator. So you restarted. How often does the legislator in Arizona meet? Like in Hawaii, it's 4 months, January to May, something like this.
Pretty similar in Arizona. So we start the second week of January, and then, you reach like the 100-day of session around April. But Arizona's been really great at pushing it out a little bit longer. So our sine die, our last day of session, was actually in mid-June this past year. So we want it to be closer to that end of April, beginning of May, but sometimes things trail to the mid-June mark.
Interesting. And that's so interesting for me as coming from Germany. It's this really small country. While we all have states within too, but this is a continent, right? The United States of America is it's 50 little countries within one continent. And how big is the legislature? How many people did you have to convince, actually? I mean, if you have the Senate, how many do you have there? And how many do you have in the House?
So there's 30 members in the Senate and 60 over in the House. And then with that, you have the Speaker of the House, you have the Majority Leader, the Minority Leader, and then the assistants to both sides. And then over at the Senate, you have the President, Majority and Minority Leader, and then their assistants. And then each chamber also has a number of whips that are within leadership to they're more of a stronger personality, might not be so much on a progressive or conservative side of things, but fairly moderate to help lean people in the right direction.
You have to convince all the people, right? To get it through the
Yes.
legislator.
And some people, they don't want to meet with you. And so on top of all the members you have to meet with, you have the policy staff for both the Republican and Democratic chambers or sides of each chamber. And so then you have, the different groups. Everyone who is in lobbying, they are doing what they can for their client. It doesn't really matter what it is, you sign to serve for your client and what they want. And so if you have a client that doesn't like a bill, then you're lobbying against it. So we had a lot of that, and that's where that stakeholder builds in, where you make the amendment to the legislation to make sure that a certain group isn't tied down into the bill.
Yeah. Boss. It's incredible, this sausage making from bills to a law, right? And then really overarching, I think democracy as a form of government is incredible because we are the government, right? That's the whole idea, that we, the people, put people in place, be representatives of us, and then with all the markup and how complicated it is, but it's the form of government I definitely want to live on, and I've lived on them all my life. But to hear all these little side stories, well, it's not a side story, it's how the wheels are turning. Would be another podcast if you tell me side stories, how you get it through. But the human aspect of it too, how you have to be pushing forward and be persistent. And really, it's so beautiful to hear that you as a young person know the system now. You already have it. And you already brought voices to the voiceless. And you were surrounded by a lot of people that already started the process. That's what I hear, right? This group already had that and wanted to create change. And then you probably started to run with them. And then it brought you to a place where you are today, being employed by a group that is lobbying for the client.
Yeah, as an intern, I actually was sitting in on a stakeholder meeting for this bill that was being ran that previous year. And I could see the people who were so passionate and, persistent in what they wanted to do for this client and also just for themselves. And so I introduced myself to them and was like, I love this. I work in veterinary medicine. This is something I'm very passionate about. How can I work with you on this? So they took me under their wing, and I was a, very supportive aspect in that following year where we got passed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important where your heart sits and what drives that in your how you spend your days, what the driver is and how you spend your life to make change. It's absolutely beautiful. Fantastic. So, I mean, seriously, meaningful change. It's like I always have that on my chest, right? Make meaningful change.
It's hard
So
to know how everyone feels and how you feel until you actually are able to sit back and look at all the work you've done. So I'm very fortunate for the opportunities and for meeting you with Manta Ray advocates and just, getting able to just make a big blurb of everything that I want to do and just going for it.
that's right. Yeah, and you're young. There's so much more coming. That's I always look at this on this podcast. I had now already other young people to give them a voice and how they also realize why it's so important to stay up to date and how the world works and how the society is formed. That the laws are what forms how we live together. And I'm pretty excited for all of us to all meet you and give you a voice on this podcast. Literally, we met twice in person here in Hawaii, and now we have this incredible. And I hope the listener takes that with them. You can all make a change, meaningful change, and it doesn't matter young or old. We all have a voice. This was a wonderful conversation with Makenna. I'm really, really glad that we talked through the actual details of how legislation is made and how we can be a voice for the voiceless. So thank you for sharing your journey. There's so much more coming. If you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe, hit a like, and we'll see you next week with a new episode of the Ocean Wings podcast, from Manta Ray Magic to Meaningful Change. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Martina.
Thanks for joining us on Ocean Wings. If this episode moved you, inspired you, or made you think, please follow and share it with someone who cares about conservation and making meaningful change. Want to learn more or experience the magic of manta rays? Get in touch at oceanwingspodcast.com and subscribe to our emails for more stories from the ocean. Tune in next week for another episode. Until then, keep swimming with purpose. Aloha.